Good evening, everyone. My name is William Lanzillo. I'm the studio coordinator of Sculpture, and welcome to our summer faculty lecture series. I want to welcome our virtual participants watching tonight, as well as our Board of Trustees and National Council. Thank you for your support. Tonight we'll be hearing from two artists, Ivana Dama and Julie Winokur. Before we begin, please silence your cell phones. Anderson Ranch acknowledges that our campus resides on the traditional ancestral territory of the Ute people, who called the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond home for over 800 years. Through our mission to promote a wide range of arts, cultures, and voices, we commit to partner with and honor the indigenous ancestors and residents of this sacred land where we learn, work, and create. Our first speaker will be Ivana Dama, who is teaching in sculpture this week. Ivana is an artist and researcher holding an MFA in sculpture from Yale University. She previously graduated from UCLA's School of Art and Architecture with a degree in Media Arts and Digital Humanities. Her multidisciplinary work spans audio-video installations, robotics, web projects, and music performances, with a focus on the nonverbal expression of traumatic experiences through sound studies and sonic memories. Ivana's practice explores the relationship between sound and vibrations at various scales, from the microscopic to the architectural and satellite. Her work has been featured in over 30 group shows, and she has had solo exhibitions in Portland and Los Angeles. In addition to her artistic practice, she recently joined Columbia University's MFA program in visual arts as a professor, where she teaches a class titled Critical Issues in Sound. Please join me in welcoming Ivana.
Okay, I'm slightly taller. Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction. I am beyond excited to be here. I have to take like 1 minute from my artist talk to just say how much I love this place. Anderson Ranch is unlike any other place in the world. I actually was a student here, and then I was also teaching in the new media department 2 years ago. Had amazing time. And actually, I was just during the dinner talking to a couple of you that I made amazing friends when I was a student here, and we're still in touch, and we did 4 trips together. So this is a really special place, and I feel like more close or connected to some of the people I met at Anderson Ranch than even my graduate school programs or my undergraduate classmates. So it's a very, very special place, and I'm very excited to be here. With that, I want to kind of give a brief background about sort of where I'm coming from as an artist and also as a human. And I think it's kind of relevant to what's going on in the current state that as we all are in now. So I'm gonna I hate to do this, but I'm gonna just briefly share very, very few things of the area where I'm coming from, because a lot of times people actually don't know, and I don't blame them because it's so complicated that sometimes I even have to look things up. So I was born in a country that was called Yugoslavia, and our country changed the name a few times. Luckily, a city didn't change the name since the 6th century, but I was born in Belgrade. And then, when my parents were probably growing up, it was called Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Then it changed its name to Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. Then, somewhere in 2003, it became Union of Serbia and Montenegro, and then after 2006 it became Republic of Serbia. And as you can see on the image, it was one large country consisting of areas that are now keeps splitting into smaller sections as we speak. So the newest country to separate is Kosovo, and it's very, I feel like, difficult to talk about. I hope this is not my phone. If it is, I will ask someone to help me, but I'm glad it's not. So it's actually really a specific area because we are surrounded by these places that sound wonderful. So when I tell people like, oh yeah, it's just across the Adriatic Sea from Italy, or it's just a little bit north from Greece, people always imagine these like kind of wonderful sceneries, which it is. It's a beautiful country, but politically and geologically was in such a very, very difficult time, and every generation experienced that. So I became really interested in this sort of generational, not just trauma, but like kind of like things that every generation had to deal with, including my generation. So I'll briefly talk about a few fun facts, and I promise I'm going to stop here. It was the communist country, just to give you a sense of it, but we are the only communist country that had McDonald's that was open in 1988 in Belgrade, in my hometown. And this location is quite important right now because this McDonald's is still there, and it's in one of the central locations in the city. And then the second fun fact that I included, that the passport of Yugoslavia was almost like a VIP pass at that time, because citizens could travel freely both to US and Western countries as well as Soviet Union during the Cold War era, which was the only country that could do that. Unfortunately, not the case anymore today, but if you're lucky enough that you have family that has mixed origins from multiple countries, you might have 3 or 4 passports, and you're able to pull them as politically needed at a certain time. So I've been using some of that in my advantage recently. I'm also going to share just a brief video that was posted. This was a protest exactly where McDonald's is the center of this giant circle. There's major protests happening in Serbia right now, and these are student-organized protests against the government there. So I'm really proud of all this energy and kind of collective energy that exists in the country to change things, and it's been going on forever. So it's kind of great to see it again, but I feel like, oh, we've seen this before. I also wanted to include the image of the building where I grew up in. So my building happened to have it's a socialist building that has architecture, and I know that some of you are architects in my workshops. I'm very excited about that. I often think about how political regimes can shape things like even like architecture. So the idea in this kind of socialist countries was we're all even, so we live in these little apartments that are all like kind of same. But then to maintain this kind of funding and maintaining the building, they got this deal from Coca-Cola to put a sign on, and I don't know, and I grew up in that building, so it was quite interesting space to understand as a young child. And then the image on the right of the screen, it's the map actually. When I was 4 years old, there was a bombing of my hometown in 1999, and it was a large event for, as you can imagine. We lived in a shelter for 2 months, and it was, not great. But I remember it as a kid as best time ever because we got to play anytime we want. We got to live with all of our friends. So the idea of community became really important to me. at a very young age. And then one of the things that really influences my practice that happened is that, so the building that you're seeing on, I hope that okay, this works. So the building that was accidentally hit by NATO during the bombing was Chinese embassy. And this, as you can imagine, US was involved in it. It created a chaos on a larger world level. So they came President Bill Clinton came on the television and said, okay, that was actually an accident. We were planning to hit the building that was 350 meters away. And then my building is right in between the two buildings. But the other interesting thing that happened is when the bomb dropped into the Chinese embassy, it never exploded. It did kill a lot of people, including the ambassador's daughter, which was even a bigger deal at the time. But the vibrations and the sound from the bomb dropping into the building and just continuing to vibrate for days is what kind of influences my practice. And I've been obsessed with these particular sounds that are almost kind of like hunting me, like I'm trying to understand them as I'm growing up. So I also wanted to include, I forgot that I have this, but this is a really wonderful image of a hotel of Yugoslavia. And then this is a video that was posted, I think, a month ago. That hotel is being removed and they're building I think that Trump is trying to build a Trump Tower there. So it's quite interesting politics continuing to happen. And I'm just gonna include a few more images. So I recently did a research, I got a Dean's Research Grant at Yale School of Arts to go back and visit some of the buildings that are damaged during the bombing, but were never removed. So it's one of the rare cities where there is actually infrastructure, almost like a monument as the building. I don't know why they did that, but the government decided to do that. And I wanted to go back and revisit these places and try to record the acoustic quality of these rooms. So they're sort of interesting spaces because they're semi-open, semi-closed, semi-buildings, semi-ruins. And I was working with a sound engineer from Serbia, and we did recordings of, we used reverb and pop the balloons in different areas of the room, trying to get the acoustic quality of that room. So if some of you are not familiar with the reverb as a term, every room has one, and you can notice it the most easily. Like if you're in Cathedral, your voice sounds very different than if you're in Littlewood sauna. So the reflections and materials and everything influences that. So I wanted to be able to play any sound on the regular speakers that it would sound like it was played in these buildings. So that kind of was ongoing project that I'm continuing to work on, and I'm making sort of games that you would be able to be in the spaces sonically, not visually, kind of like virtual reality just for sound. And then I'm jumping through some projects and kind of going to explain how some ideas shaped by these early experiences. So this was actually the first time that I ever did a project related to these topics, and it was back in 2018, which is quite recently. So I was an artist before that even, and I was doing work mostly connected to coding and algorithms, and I kind of always felt emotionally detached from events because I felt like I was too young to remember anything. Here is the project that I called Home 1999. It's the engraving of aluminum engravings of the images seen on the U.S. Geological Survey website, which are available to all of you. These are satellite images. So I was interested in what would the land look like during the days of the bombing, and then I engraved them on the laser cutter, and this is anodized aluminum. So one of the first things after leaving the shelters that I remember was everything was covered with a kind of a very thin layer of concrete dust. So I wanted to bring that into the work as well. So I kind of used this dusty layer. So when you remove the print from the laser cutter, it kind of has a lot of dust, and this is a little close-up image. And then I also wanted to mention something that's very relevant in 2019, so just a year after I made this work. I was visiting my parents, and it was exactly 20 years since the bombing of Belgrade, and government organized this Memorial Day, so they decided to activate all the air raid sirens for the Memorial Day ceremony, or I don't know if it's ceremony the right word, so I apologize if it's not. But they decided to do that, and the same night, a lot of people had heart attacks, and me and my sister experienced like severe, almost like a rash on our body, and it was like kind of like PTSD reaction to what happened, but we didn't really understand it at the time, so we thought that we both used the wrong lotion or something. So it took us a while to figure out that it was actually connected to the sound. And then when I came back to US, I was working in my studio, and I kept thinking about the sound and how does that connect to my own practice that I had prior to that moment. So I was always kind of interested in doing something related to sound, but I was not a musician, I was never trained, and I never learned how to play any musical instrument, so I didn't know where to start. So I sort of started through collaborations and asking friends for help and kind of working through. Oh, this is a reminder for myself to show you the video. So this is a long performance. It was not the first performance we did together, but it was one of the performances that I remember, and I'm gonna just show a brief preview of it. It was about 30 minutes long altogether. So let's try to see if this is gonna work. I did it intentionally so that it doesn't. Okay, I think it's working.
Those who are unlucky to have missed the last ventilator can breathe. Those who are feeling terrorized by police can breathe. Those who lost their job can breathe. The uninsured can breathe.
And I'll try to, because it's very short presentations today, I'm going to just try to talk over a little bit. I was reading a statement at the beginning of this performance, and we performed at the Botanical Gardens at UCLA. And it was part of Ars Electronica festival that was streamed online. So performance had multiple elements, and we used modular synthesizers. I was making some custom electronics, and actually some of my students will, in my workshop, will learn how to create circuitry and how to play with plants actually tomorrow. So it's a very, very simple way to do this, and I'm just going to briefly play this few seconds.
As a part of our live performance, we'll have various plans when COVID-19 is desperate to lose came in social and uses a feedback ecological and composition with the capabilities. Those who are both
pause there just because of lack of time, but all of these videos are available on my website that I'll be showing today, so kind of it's more previews. And that was kind of the entering point. I continued to do other work too, but I think collaboration was quite important as part of my practice. So this was a project that I was interested in control, and one of our professors in school asked us to predict what is the next technology after VR and AR, and we called our project emotional reality. So we predicted that one person's emotions would be transferred to another person, so we thought that this can potentially be used in teenage discipline or military espionage and whatnot, and or long-distance relationships. So unfortunately, this technology was speculative. I still don't think it picked up, but it was very painful. And and that gives you kind of like a sense of like I had this level of humor in my work, even though some of the topics I was covering are directly related to control. And then I didn't realize that until I applied for grad school, and one of my chairs of my department, Aki Sasamoto, asked me during the interview, why you're obsessed with control? And I was shocked to hear this question, and I started thinking about it, and I actually realized that potentially the lack of control that I had in growing up in that messy space, politically, culturally, in every way, I felt like maybe that's what brings my interest to it. So this piece is called, it's titled actually Command and Control, and I was interested in playing a musical instrument without touching it. So I created a pupil tracking software that would allow you to position your pupil in a specific place, and that would actually trigger a motor that would play acoustically a sound. So prior to this, there were projects that would create a digital sound, so digital input, digital output. I was very interested in how can I use this instead of playing drums or playing something acoustically. So I have here a little demo of how that works. These projects are really not fun, especially the flies come into your eyes, and it's really difficult. You have to focus, and you're like, oh no, I looked in the wrong place. But I was interested in that idea of also thinking how much control we have in our eye movement, and then there's also involuntary blinking. So there is only so much we can go without blinking. So I was interested in that kind of change that happens and lack of control that we have over our own bodies. I had an installation on Governor's Island. It's essentially an extension of the same project, but where general audience was able to trigger the installation. So each visitors would be responsible for a different drum set. And people felt like it was a magic. They felt like I was reading their mind. They were asking me, what was the method that I was using? I was like, it's literally just tracking your pupils, and it's controlling the speed of a motor. So these are some of the motors that we'll learn in our workshop that I used for this installation. And it felt like it was great to see a general public experience the work that was not just like me performing. It was actually ongoing installation that was on the Governor's Island for 3 months, and over 4,000 visitors experienced the piece. So I had a software that was tracking people's eyes, so I knew exactly how many people walked into the room. And I was quite impressed that it survived, the whole setup survived, even though it was very, it felt like I didn't maybe start that well enough. I apologize for the sound. I'm going to try to lower that a little bit. I continue to perform and be part of like electronic music scene in Los Angeles, and I couldn't really tell why. I was also hiding this from my UCLA friends or like kind of like my art friends. I just was doing things with other people or was performing in many different places, and I didn't really know why I was interested in that. It was just sort of like, this is my little passion. I want to do this as a hobby, but it's not really my practice. And I collaborated with many people, and I sometimes performed alone. This one was with Dade Roy, who is an artist, and we were in a group show together, and then we decided to also do a performance where their bicycle would trigger my synthesizers and power them. So we were interested in analog synthesizers, but also analog electricity too. actually, this is a big jump, but I moved to New Haven, and before to that moment, I lived in Los Angeles. So I didn't really realize how much political divide was happening in Connecticut, in New Haven. So I had to pass by this building every day. It's a Planned Parenthood building. And, this is probably something we all experience at some level of people harassing women trying to get into the building. So I decided to make this work. And I titled it, "I Don't Know If You Can Hear Us, Although We're Being Very Loud." And this was the opening statement of one of the congresswomen that was talking about this issue in the country, about abortion rights in the United States. So I decided to choose that as the title for the work. But essentially, it's very simple setup, even though it looks a little bit confusing probably to you. I had a little vacuum chamber, and inside of it I had an egg timer that's used for cooking, and then I also had a vacuum pump that would remove the air. And I was really interested in science and physics, and if I learned in one of my physics classes that if there is no air, there is no sound. So I was like, what happens if I remove this? Would it actually work? It's like a very basic physics experiment that they do in elementary schools in Serbia. So I actually decided to make this piece about that. And then I kind of continued to work on this work, and I decided to actually use different sources of sound instead of just the egg timer. I decided to bring air raid sirens from Serbia. So in 2 boxes that you see here, these are the air raid sirens that were used to signal bombing in my hometown, and they actually are very loud to a point that if you're close to them, they can almost hurt your hearing. So I was interested in what happens if I'm able to silence them and use the vacuum to kind of create this other environment. And then on the further corner, I used, I actually was so excited about this, if it's gonna work or not. The cables have to run out of the box, so I worked with physicists at Yale to kind of make these systems that would work, and it worked. And I was so happy about it, and I invited my we had visiting artists and my faculty. I invited them to my studio, and I was like, it works, and I was showing them. And they all said the same thing. They said, yeah, this is great, but most people don't even know how the air raid siren looks like. They don't even know that it makes sound. Is there any way that you can kind of let the air back into the box and kind of suggest that? And I was like, I really want it to be installation. I don't want to be there moving things. So I kept kind of kept that thought in the back of my head. And I actually figured a best way to do this. I had a little control valve that would open and close and let the air back into the box. And I was able to fully have circles, the kind of cycles, and you can actually hear them, hopefully. And it says made in Yugoslavia, and country doesn't exist anymore. So for a brief 15 seconds, there's quote-unquote silence. But I was very interested in that kind of controlling, again, of the air molecules inside of these chambers. And I'm not going to show this, but I just started continuing to research more about analog synthesizers, and I realized that actually the synthesizer in my hometown sounds like a siren. This was a really important moment for me because I started to see connection for the first time between electronic music was doing on the side as a hobby, and the air raid sirens. So it was the very, very first time to kind of realize that. I started making my own synthesizers. I was taking a lot of engineering classes at Yale, and I actually made everything alone, from like printing to making the knobs on the lathe, like every single thing. And I started thinking about how hardware is so important for sound, because if you have knobs that are so small and you move from 0 to 100, you lose so many microtones that happen in between. But if the size of your knob is size of the wheel on the truck, it takes you physically time to move it from that same 0 to 100. So I want to make a giant knob one day. I haven't made it yet, but I always thought of like this scene from Metropolis, and I kind of like moving the time and clock and knobs. So I'm kind of including, my presentation is also a bit about my obsessions too. These are some of the air raid sirens that I'm really obsessed with, like different designs, so just I kind of continue this research, and I still do this. So it's an ongoing part of my practice is writing as well. And at some point during my time in graduate school, I was TAing for Professor Brian Kane in the music department, and he was telling me, you absolutely have to go visit this collection at Harvard University, collection of historical scientific instruments. They have so many sirens. And I was like, okay, people have been telling me that before, but not for that specific place. So I kind of ignored it for a long time. And then after I actually met some scientists at MIT, and Neil Gershenfield, who was one of the physicists there, told me, oh, Bob Moog, who he was a good friend with Bob Moog, who started Moog synthesizers. He was obsessed with sirens, and he spent a lot of time at this collection at Harvard, and that kind of made me go to the collection itself. Spent a lot of time there. I was really obsessed with these 1800s ideas of sirens that failed. So a lot of sirens were actually never made it to the commercial use or military use. And I started revisiting these early ideas. So this was developed by Rudolf König in Paris. And his idea was, okay, I want to have a different siren that would be for different urgencies. So if it's an earthquake, it would slightly sound different than if it's a war, or if it's a fire, it would slightly sound different. So it was almost like a record player for air raid sirens. Unfortunately, the idea didn't make it. But I decided, okay, it would be wonderful if I can revisit this idea and make my own. So I immediately went back to my professor in physics at Yale, and we tried to test one.
Oh, that's much better.
So as you can see here, I made, in less than 5 minutes, I made the disc on the laser cutter that was just engraving different holes. And we spin it really fast on the lathe, and we use different sources of air. And then if the air, even a straw and like blowing the air would be enough to trigger the sound. So sound is actually acoustically made by cutting it. So the disc is spinning really fast, and then any air that's blown through the holes cuts it and creates this like very specific pitch. So then it took me to my thesis project. I made the 6 feet large aluminum discs. And then I was interested in bringing collaboration into my work, because it was an important part of my practice. So I invited 10 artists to tell me what is the most important issue or urgency to them, what would be their siren about. So some of the discs were actually this one that I'm showing on the screen right now is the poem that I'm going to show you at the very end of my presentation today. But it's the poem engraved in Braille, so all the openings and holes are actually mean something. They're not just randomly placed. And then I also realized something so interesting that which they couldn't test this in 1800s. It was really difficult to cut not round shapes. So I started cutting like squares, and it actually creates square waves. So I became really interested in acoustic properties of instruments and kind of analog instruments and utilizing motors. And here is one of the performances that I did with Robert Reiki, who came to to perform with me. And we actually did a performance together, and he was really interested in a loud sound of air source because he's a noise artist, and he was really interested in that kind of connection of having a sound that would be almost lost in this kind of wind of air. And a lot of people after the performance came up to us and said, this was very strange. It felt like being in a hurricane and hearing it so far in a distance, like a little pitch coming through. And then I did also a performance with Ross Weidman, who is also a sound artist and musician, and he was trained as a musician, as a cellist, and for him was so important to have pure tonal structure of the instrument. So we worked so hard of getting these tones and removing any noise and air, and it was such a different performance, and everyone was kind of shocked with how differently it would sound. And then I also, one of the other collaborations was again with Dave Roy, who came up with the idea of changing the source of air. So instead of designing a new disc, they thought of like, oh, it would be great to bring nitrogen and use nitrogen gas and change also the nozzles and have trigger multiple notes at the same time. So we were actually working on a kind of a scale and did performance together. And the length of performance was dependent on how much nitrogen we have in the bottle. So for a few performances we did, it was about 11 minutes long, which is, I really like that as a durational piece. And here's a little preview of one of the So as I continued to do this work, it was really hard. I noticed it was really difficult to document because it's so much about acoustics and being close to it. So when I was performing at the Shrine Gallery in Tribeca, people actually gathered around it and to hear it like really closely. But I continue to kind of work on this project, and it's an ongoing one. And I'm just going to end with the sort of project that I'm currently working on. I was really interested in seeing this in many different parts of the world, like in Florida, in Puerto Rico. When people are preparing for hurricanes and whatnot, they actually started placing the packaging tape on the windows to prevent the glass from shattering into many different pieces. So they were hoping that in case if vibrations would affect this area, that they would actually fell as one piece. Scientists proved that this does not work, but it continues to be a practice all around the world for a very long time. So I became really inspired by that, and I kind of started looking into different examples. This is in Paris, in the First World War. They knew that they're going to be bombed, so they prepared for bombing, and they worked extensively on these designs that they would place on the window displays. So I became really interested in this. Okay, I feel like I'm onto something, and started buying packaging tape. And I didn't know why, but I just like started testing things in my studio, then leaving it for a long time on a very warm day to see the residue of the adhesive. And all of the tapes that I was buying were made by same company called 3M, and you probably heard of it. And then I also noticed that some of my tape recordings that I had for sound were also developed by the same company called 3M. So I thought, what if I create a project that instead of packaging tape, I would have installation on a window of Vanda Museum in Los Angeles, where I'm currently trying to develop this project with. And instead of packaging tape, that we are using magnetic tape that's used for sound. And then back in 80s, Laurie Anderson did a piece where instead of the violin, she replaced the violin bow of a violin with a tape, and then she had a cassette reader on the violin, and she was able to move through different sound samples by changing the bows of the violin, and I really loved that project. So I wanted to do something similar where I would perform with cassette, the reader from cassette machine, and move through different audio recordings on the window display. I recently, last year, had very difficult time. I moved to New York, I started teaching, and I couldn't have a good studio space to make physical work and to fabricate work. Just a week after I moved to my new studio, a dance studio moved above me, so it was really loud, and I couldn't even have things hanging on the walls because of how vibrations were working and just moving my whole studio physically. So I had a very difficult time making work, but then I started using, and I would get invitations to do projects, and I started performing extensively last year. And then I sort of, through performances, I realized that I was actually telling a story. In each performance, I was kind of covering a different chapter. So I became really interested in working on a book project right now, where I'm kind of developing this story that is performative. And this is some of the screenshots from the recent performances. And then on this side, you can actually see one of the most recent performances at the museum. Sense. So I started making capacitive sensors, and if some of you are familiar with it, they're similar sensors that are used in theremins and kind of like early musical instruments. But I started and they're usually the range is only a few inches. So with researchers at MIT, I developed a very large scale theremin, so I'm able to play up to 11 feet now. And I'm very excited to kind of continuing to work on this project. And with this, I'm just going to end with a poem that was engraved on one of the discs. It says, in order for me to write poetry that isn't political, I might listen to the birds. And in order to hear the birds, the warplanes must be silent. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivana. Our next speaker will be Julie Winokur. She is the founding director of Talking Eyes Media and has been a filmmaker and writer for over 3 decades. Her work has appeared on PBS, The New York Times, The Washington Post, Time, Smithsonian, and National Geographic. She is a National Geographic explorer and former professor at Rutgers University, Newark, and the International Center of Photography. Please join me in welcoming Julie.
Okay, thank you so much. I have to lower this down, lower the altitude a little bit. So I want to do, first of all, thank you so much for just hosting me here. This is an incredible opportunity. I taught here a few years back. It's been a while, but I'm also here teaching with my husband, Ed Cashy, who is a photojournalist and filmmaker, and Ed's been working with the ranch every summer now for a long time, over a decade. So I'm honored to come back again this go-round, and we're teaching this week together a workshop in visual truths. So it's about bringing words and pictures together. I started out as a writer and became an accidental filmmaker. It was partly because when Ed and I got together, we were publishing stories together, writing and photography, very traditional, magazine stories, creative nonfiction, long-form essays. And then because I was immersed in visual media, ended up becoming a filmmaker. Also at the time, the digital media became available. So folks like me could just jump in and be self-taught doing it. So over the last 20 plus years, I've been running Talking Eyes Media, which is a production company that's dedicated to doing a lot of proactive social issue documentary work. But I always think of it as a sort of sandbox where I get to really expand the boundaries of what media I work in and how we can use media to really facilitate positive social change. I believe in the power of the media as a tool, and I feel quite often it's weaponized rather than used constructively. So I have made it my personal calling to make sure that I am always facilitating some kind of forward motion through the media. So these are just examples of some of the projects that I've done over the years. Ed and I often work together. He also founded Talking Eyes with me, but I work a lot with other independent media makers as well. So this is just a range of different projects. I'm not going to go through these because I really want to focus today on some of the work that I've been doing that has grown out of the extensive reporting that I've done over the years. And so I want to talk about first, Bring It to the Table. This is a project that I launched in 2012 when Barack Obama was up for re-election, and I was incredibly disturbed by the hyper-partisanship that was infecting our political system and that was infecting our communities and our families and ourselves. And so it was inspired by our son, who was 17 at the time, and he told me that I was the most politically intolerant person he had ever met. And this was at a time where I was upset about all of this political intolerance, and then when he pointed the finger back at me, I thought, oh shit, he might be right. He might be right that I'm part of the problem, even though I think, that I'm going to shed light on an issue. I have to look in the mirror and figure out what am I doing to contribute to a toxic environment. And so it was really that moment of saying, if I'm busy pointing fingers and saying those people are the problem, I need to first work on myself before I can be constructive and valuable to anybody else. So I want to show just the movie trailer, and I'll talk a little bit about how this project evolved, and you'll get a chance to see what it looks like.
We were watching, I believe it was Fox News, a reporter who had definitely conservative views, and everything he said, you would just shoot.
I'm sorry, could you possibly turn the volume up? Because I don't think we can hear it. Thank you.
We were watching, I believe it was Fox News, a reporter who had definitely conservative views, and everything he said, you would just shoot down. So I called you intolerant because I felt like you should listen to the other side and at least hear what they have to say.
I guess this is more a journey of trying to figure out what do people truly believe.
As far as I'm concerned, the role of government should be to ensure our civil liberties.
How can you possibly support a party that doesn't support you?
I knew I was a conservative long before I knew that I was gay.
I need baptize you for the Kevin McPherson, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. I believe you just need to know His Word. I don't need to legislate God's word on you.
Folks have said in the past to me at other places, well, politics and religion should not mix. But I contend that it should.
I would love to hear you talk a little bit about the values, the beliefs behind these choices.
I was raised on welfare.
You'll ever explain your point of view to me and it still sounds dumb as hell. Sorry.
What is the actual demand of this group?
Will he be the president that has deported the most people in U.S. history? For that, we are risking arrest.
What happens is when you actually listen, there's that dangerous possibility it might change your mind.
Jesus Christ, you guys are gonna die and wind up in hell, and you think because you're in a...
If we could come to the table and say, we both want what's best, and then fight like crazy with each other over what the best way to get there is, we could still get up from the table as friends. So where Democrats may get it right, I think, is their love for the country as much as we do. We should give each other credit for that. Whether or not we agree with what a perfect America looks like, that's what we should be fighting over.
So that's a little taste of what this project looked like. So what I did, well, first of all, I want to say that 17-year-old kid that you saw in the baseball cap just got married this past week. He's 30 now, so this is, long time. But I would say that the issue that this dealt with only got worse. And so, as I said, I did this project in 2012. I went across the country and invited people to sit down and talk politics so that I could learn how to listen. It was that simple. It was just to say there's a lost art of listening, and until we all embrace that, nothing's going to change. So then I started to go out and give public presentations of the film, and eventually I morphed that into a civic engagement project where I would go in to a lot of college campuses and university, different communities around the country, and I'd bring my table and I would show the film or an excerpt of the film, and I would invite volunteers from the audience to come up and have table talks with me. And then everyone in the audience has a table talk, and we, basically are practicing civil discourse in a way that's just a very conscientious way of saying, how do I set the table properly to invite honest, authentic conversation around issues rather than going into a conversation sort of locked and loaded and ready to fight back. And so this project, I really thought I was ready to put it to bed when Donald Trump was elected the first time. I almost said arrested the first time, by the way. That was a little Freudian moment. When he was elected the first time, I was really done. I had been traveling the country extensively, and then my phone started to ring off the hook because a lot of people suddenly said, shit, we got a problem. What are we going to do? And I had a lot of people say, well, that project was so prescient. And I was like, no, it wasn't at all. It wasn't at all. We have been on this trajectory for so long that we are now sitting in, the kind of mosh pit of our own making. And so I still believe very firmly, even in this moment, that the partisanship has gotten even uglier and really more frightening in many ways. We still have to reclaim personally that role in reversing course on how we deal with other people. So I show this project as a way of walking into new work that Ed and I are doing. We've started a book project that has us going back to our roots of words and pictures rather than filmmaking. And it really has grown out of this feeling of not understanding our own country anymore. We are veteran reporters. We have been telling stories about various facets of America for our entire careers. And we find ourselves kind of looking, just going, we don't even understand. We don't even know anymore. It makes me think a lot of John Steinbeck when he did Travels with Charlie. And he said, I was writing these novels, like the great American novel, but I had lost touch with my own countrymen. So he got into his little truck and he drove across country to sort of rediscover who are we. And so Ed and I have sort of taken that challenge on as well. And I want to share excerpts of some of the writing that I've been doing. We launched this project with a cross-country road trip, and we've since been focusing on 3 different communities around the country that are sort of symbolic epicenters of some of the hot-button issues of the day. But we're trying to tell this story of America at this moment on a much more granular level that's looking at real people and how complicated and nuanced their lives and their perspectives are. So I'd like to actually read some passages to take you on a little bit of the journey of American sketches. The world is full of stories, and most of them aren't true. Those sobering words came from a not-so-sober novelist friend at a party in San Francisco shortly before we began our journey for American sketches. At a time when our country seems turned inside out, Ed Cashy and I have gone in search of some truths. But the reality is, they're just stories, nothing more, nothing less. We went to Eagle Pass, Texas, not because of the migrant crisis, but despite it. From a distance, Eagle Pass sounds like a place where drama jumps out of the cracks in the pavement. High-speed chases rule the roads, and trafficking of one sort or another is just commerce as usual. On the contrary, we found a relatively quiet, deeply rooted town that feels more like northern Mexico than the southern United States. This is kind of like occupied territory, says Pancho Navarez, a former Texas state representative with a buzz cut and tattooed biceps. His property borders the Rio Grande, and between the migrants climbing the banks and the Border Patrol agents scouting by land and by sea, it's hard to know which occupation he's talking about. Growing up, Pancho's father always referred to white people as Americanos, people distinct from Pancho and his family, despite their deep roots on both sides of the border. By all accounts, Pancho's family is more American than my own, which arrived 2 centuries later. Pancho's blue Land Rover kicks up dust as he takes us onto his 500-acre ranch. As we round a bend, random bits of clothing strewn in the scrub give way to a garbage heap sloping down the side of the barbed wire fence and covering the road. Backpacks, diapers, shirts, bras, pants, they look like they slid off their owners as they ran to safety. Toothbrushes and medicine packets, condoms and baby toys litter the ground as though the alluvial flow of humanity has left its sediment behind. The men, women, and children whose detritus lines this road have reached the promised land, and they've tried to shed their old selves in the dirt. Pancho served in the Texas state legislature until he got caught with cocaine at an airport on camera. He knew he was in big trouble, not the slap on the hand kind of trouble, but the existential kind that if he didn't get sober, he was likely to end up dead. Despite his digressions, Pancho still polls well if he decides to run again. But since rehab, he insists, I'm too sane now to be in politics. When the dispatch came into the fire station, Julio Valdez told me they had a floater. So we jumped into his truck. In the past, there might have been 6 drownings per year in Eagle Pass. But in December 2023 alone, the fire department recovered 17 bodies from the river. I've heard the Rio Grande called deceptive, devious, dangerous. I'm told that when migrants walk across the shallow parts, they sometimes hit unpredictably deep pivots where they get sucked down and swept away. For people who have traveled thousands of miles fleeing unbearable circumstances, the river is just one more challenge in a series of ultimatums. What is a narrow stretch of water when salvation is a rock skip away? We stand solemnly by the side of the truck, the woman's body just 10 yards away. She lies inanimate, a human not being, without breath or beat. She is covered in mud, flopped on her side, arms extended, shirt and sweatshirt stretched overhead, exposing the straps of her bra. I wish she could pull her shirt down, get more comfortable. The indignity is just too much. I came in search of this moment, but now that I'm here, I'm not clear exactly why. Professionally, I'm here to bear witness, to make sense, to share with others so we can correct our mistakes. But on a personal level, as a human being standing on the bank of the Rio Grande, I wonder whether my presence will do anyone any good. The weight feels incapacitating. There's a thick band of flesh across the woman's midsection that looks like she's wearing a weightlifting belt. It's her exposed skin turned scaly and tarnished, as though her flesh has fused with the river's life force. Ed starts to circle at a healthy radius, searching for an angle to photograph the woman as respectfully as possible. She is beyond consent. His purpose here is singular, to secure evidence of this moment. Unlike me, he doesn't have the luxury of recreating the scene at a later date. We share the belief that by documenting her plight, we can be that beat of a butterfly wing that alters the course of the universe. If one shutter click can save one life from suffering the same fate, then our work has value. We do our best to breathe life back into her story. Cornelia Muskies shows us dirt road used by Border Patrol that is visible from her terrace. A widow who lives alone, she keeps a pair of black men's sneakers outside the front door to deter unwanted visitors. During the pandemic, a Honduran woman knocked at Cornelia's living room window, startling her. She gave the woman some water and told her to keep the sun on her left and Mexico on her right, so she could find her way to the train. Cornelia, a white woman and devout Episcopalian, raised her 3 children in Mexico on the family ranch, 45 minutes from the nearest town. Her hazel eyes, pink-rimmed glasses, embroidered blouse, and gentle demeanor are camouflage for a tough frontier woman. She carries a 9mm pistol in her purse that she says she's prepared to use, and she recounts in a soft-spoken voice being held hostage for 2 hours at gunpoint in 2014 by members of a drug cartel in Mexico. The fact that she lived to tell the tale seems statistically impossible. It is one of many anomalies we encountered in Eagle Pass. Elias left Eagle Pass at 18 to attend the University of Southern California, but once he got there, he realized he had no way to pay the tuition. The porn industry provided a means to get through college. It also became a gateway to drug addiction and an insatiable quest for physical perfection by any means necessary. Despite his high-risk lifestyle, he earned a bachelor's in international relations, followed by a master's in clinical psychology, all the while living at a precarious edge. After 2 overdoses, he fled to Eagle Pass to survive. Elias tells me that running for Eagle Pass City Council was the second most traumatic experience of his life, second only to sexual assault. As a former gay porn actor, Elias didn't appear to be a contender when he ran for office, but his superpower is turning vulnerability into strength, and the people responded. "I might not be perfect, but I won't lie to you," he said, and the voters handed him their trust. As they did again just recently, 4 years after his first election. The dirt, it's all about the dirt. The Mississippi Delta boasts some of the richest soil in the world, which is what drew white settlers here in the early 1800s, regardless of the inhospitable terrain. Today, this alluvial plain lies eerily flat and naked, stripped of its forests and wrestled into symmetrical rows. Nature's tangled riches have been raked into submission in one of the most unholy testaments to human grist. In the Mississippi Delta, civil engineers have managed to reroute the most powerful river in the United States. By contrast, more than 70 years of civil rights have failed to resolve the course of the Delta's racial divide. From persistently segregated schools to the railroad tracks that cleave neighborhoods apart, every conversation in the Delta circles back to race. It infuses the soil with 1,000 underground creeks, and like fertilizer, it nourishes tall stalks above ground while poisoning the dirt below. Watson Turnipseed grew up in Sumner, Mississippi, the site of the notorious Emmett Till trial. His family was on a first-name basis with some of the perpetrators of and his grandfather attended the murder trial. Decades later, Papa Frank co-chaired the committee to make 3 notorious locations designated as the Emmett Till National Monument. Farming runs deep in Watson's DNA. The Mitchners came to Mississippi in the 1830s, looking to tame the land and reap the profits. They acquired 15,000 acres, most of which is now rented out. Watson's great-great-grandfather served as a proud soldier in the Confederate Army. His great-grandfather had the presence of mind to sell off his cotton the week before the market crash of 1920. Grandpa Frank was president of the U.S. Cotton Council, and now Watson, a 30-year-old lawyer in New Orleans with very progressive ideas, has aspirations of reclaiming his family legacy. He currently rents 500 acres from Grandpa Frank. Christy Miller climbs down from the bright green tractor, braids piled high like a turban at the top of her head. Her skinny jeans tuck seamlessly into faded cowboy boots, and her hazelnut skin radiates back at the setting sun. Tired and gritty, the 12-hour workday has taken a piece of her energy. She's incubating 2 little ones in her belly, and her tan work shirt strains against her breasts when she pulls the waist edge down over her belly. Christy's part of the 1%, her husband Robert says, from the sidelines. He's referring to black farmers, whose numbers have been declining for decades. Christy's family owns 600 acres and leases another 1,000, but it still isn't enough to grow the Mississippi Delta's white gold, cotton. Christy tells me that requires at least 6,000 or 7,000 acres before it's profitable. Then there's the high-tech harvester and the weekly crop dusting, all of which put cotton out of reach for black farmers. At 33, Robert is a transplant to the Delta. Every day he builds street cred by mentoring young men in nearby Jonestown, a town of 857 people in deep need of attention. The poverty rate runs at 54%, and if it weren't for jobs at the Amazon warehouse over an hour away, the median income would be even lower than the current $18,657. The day we went, oh, sorry about that. The day we went squirrel hunting with Jimmy McClellan, he had a metastasizing black eye that stained his cheek moss green so his entire face looked uncannily like camouflage. A survivalist who owns a successful security company, Jimmy is said to have brandished a semi-automatic weapon during a George Floyd protest in Cleveland, Mississippi. His brother died from a heart attack on these same hunting grounds, and he tears up recounting that day when he was helpless to save his brother. We go home empty-handed. Jimmy clings to conspiracy theories. He's convinced the government, if that's who they are, want us all to drive electric cars so they can control us. He swears by the Epoch Times as the only trustworthy news source, and I'm reluctant to tell him it's published by the Falun Gong, a specious religious cult. Jimmy also loves his weed. His latest venture is a weed business with his son. It's hard to imagine a more animated backdrop than Orlando, Florida for the war on woke, the Republican backlash against everything conservatives find offensive about the left. Nowhere do the extremes live in closer proximity than Florida, where Governor Ron DeSantis signed a rapid succession of conservative laws, which in turn unleashed a volley of progressive lawsuits. At the same time pride flags are flying from buildings, books are being pulled from school shelves. Kim Short has barely missed a school board meeting in years, and she joined Moms for Liberty. Kim's motor lacks a neutral gear, and she keeps revving forward. Why does sex have to be part of books that we offer in the school systems? Why do we have to talk about sexuality all the time? I mean, why is there a whole month about it? We're in the midst of Pride Month, and avoiding rainbow flags is about as easy as avoiding mouse ears at the Orlando airport. With barely an inhale between thoughts, Kim says, there's this MAP group, which is a minor attracted people group, which is pedophiles, call it what it is. They're actually part of the LGBTQ element. And there's a flag that they've actually incorporated into the pride flag. It's like a triangle with all these different colors in it. And then they have meetings, and I'm just like, we've gone too far. I don't want this in schools. Blam, just like that, the wheel has flown off its axle and the whole cart is hazardously veering off the road. I'm holding onto the seatbelt, wondering where she heard about this fetishistic group and whether it even actually exists, let alone whether anyone would ever introduce it into schools. It apparently does exist, by the way, as a new way of destigmatizing pedophilic urges, but the LGBT community has not condoned it, nor agreed to share its flag. Orlando, surprising, lush tropics, lakes everywhere, not Disney, separate worlds, not such a small world after all, gayer, queerer, transer than expected. Pride is in the air, so is the vacuum grip of conservative backlash. The girls at Southern Nights, one of the oldest lesbian clubs in the country, let their freak flags fly, a deafening throb of rap and reggaeton, and mounds of flesh, breasts and buttocks on stage, dollar bills passed from teeth to teeth in a haze of aggressive fun. Boys with legs, waist-high, platform shoes and close-cropped afros, the sexy, sexless, gender-affirmed, hetero, homo, polyamorous lust is love. Shea Cutliff arrives at the beach in a leopard skin bikini and oversized movie star sunglasses, a large, unapologetic presence. She helps her boyfriend set up a blue nylon tent and then heads straight to the beach. According to Shea, her full name, Shayani, means steadfast, confident, and outspoken. Shea says she always knew she was a girl, and her family accepted that. As a young child, she went costume shopping for Halloween with her mother and godmother. As she tells the story, my god sisters were like, I want to be a princess. I want to be a witch. And I was like, I want to be a princess too. My godmother was like, you could be a warlock. And I'm like, I don't want to be a warlock. I want to be a fucking witch. Who the fuck told you I wanted to be a warlock? An argument broke out in the store, and Shay's mother said, I want my child to be able to wear whatever they want to. Suffice to say, the costume made its way home, complete with red rouge, eyeliner, and lipstick. Jarrett and Justine Johnson have found a right-sized Christianity to live by. Church in America today is not what Jesus intended, says Jarrett. Instead of talking about love, they talk about stopping abortion. The Johnsons homeschool their 4 children, own several cafes in town, and don't claim a party affiliation. Their lives are hybrid, earthy, spiritual, entrepreneurial 20th century roadmaps that allow them to move forward while staying connected to the past. As I stated at the beginning, these are just stories, nothing more, nothing less. They're the bricks we use to build our communities, our jobs, our opinions, and politics. They are momentary facts, molded by perspective and solidified by selective memory. They are my reflections conducted at the level of blades of grass, and ideally, they will help us create a shared reality and a common narrative. Okay. That's it.
Thank you for the talk, both of you. We have time for a couple questions. Julie, I'm going to have you just stay at the podium for that mic. And Ivana, you can be here. Does anyone have a question?
Hi, thank you guys both for that talk. I have a question for Ivana. I'm curious to hear you talk about where you think control and technology meet, because a lot of your earlier practice, you're using so much, that was also a really important part of the presentation. So yeah, I just want to hear about this idea of control and technology maybe being a method, or just where those worlds collide.
I often think, first of all, thank you for your question. I often think about advancements in technology and research that is usually connected to military purposes, and a lot of times technology that we use every day is quite connected to what was needed for a certain period in our history. So I do feel like it's directly connected to each other. I don't know if you want to maybe add to that and just what kind of direction. I feel like maybe, yeah, I think it's directly connected, and there's just so much probably that we can unpack more in conversations. But I also think how oftentimes control that appears politically can also be seen in the nature too. So I often tend to kind of search for elements in even like bird songs and the way they use signaling and how we create technology based on things that we see in nature and how we try to control the nature by doing advancements in things that would kind of be part of it somehow internally. So I feel like, yeah, it's very connected to each other, but it's almost like a feedback loop with both sides. Thank you.
I have a question for Julie. I was wondering if you could talk about a time when, in this project or in other projects, where certainly you're engaging in situations and conversations that would challenge your own personal beliefs. And maybe you could describe a time when that happened and you had to make a decision whether to kind of engage as like a participant in the conversation or step back more as an observer.
So the actual evolution of Bring It to the Table, I started out only asking questions, and the concept going in was I wanted for people who sat across from me to provide the questions they wanted to hear someone, you know, politically opposed to them. What would they want to hear them answer? So I began trying to be a much more of a receptacle rather than a participant, which is kind of odd to say because, you know, I'm obviously very active and proactive in the exchange. But it got to a point where it just felt disingenuous to not share my own feelings and opinions about things. And what it taught me was to try to figure out how to reframe and rephrase a question. And this brings me to this idea of curiosity. Like, you know, I feel like curiosity is the cure for so much of what's going on in the world. It is the cure. And so don't get angry, get curious. Don't get scared, get curious. You know, don't reject, get curious, because that was what I had to sort of retrain myself to think about was, somebody is saying something I so disagree with, and I just think this is either it's false, it's wrong information, or I just don't agree with the conclusion somebody came to. And so that's the moment where I just learned how to approach it differently and to be able to say, you know, I don't see it the way you do. Here's what I've seen, you know, through my travels, my experience, but I'm really curious how you came to your conclusion. Or what do you think about what I am sharing with you that I have witnessed? And I also try very hard to bring things back to what I have any kind of authority to speak about. Because if you really stop and ask yourself, do I really understand, you know, like how the GDP has gotten to where it is? No, I don't really understand that. I'm relying on something that I read in the New York Times. I don't really have that kind of background, and you know, so what I try to do very hard is to base the conversation or root the conversation back in real life examples, things that I can learn from somebody because they've witnessed things even when they're uncomfortable. So like Ed and I were in Eagle Pass recently, and we met this rancher who's got a lot of property that migrants were crossing constantly during the peak of the crisis. And so he had people tromping across his land all the time. He walked into his kitchen one day, and there were a couple of guys, and they're drinking his beers. And this guy is armed, and he says, you know, what the hell are you doing in my kitchen? He's like, I've got a pistol right here. And one of these guys spits on the ground. He says, you got shitty beer. You should really get better beer. And these two guys walk out and then go in his barn. And so, when you listen to that, kind of reality, who am I to pass judgment about what real life is like when you live in a border community? He has an experience that has to be heard and that has to be respected. Now, mind you, one of the next things he said was, when we asked him, well, have you ever shot anybody who came on your property? He said, I've really wanted to, I've thought about it, but then I thought, you know what, if I do that, they're just going to George Floyd me. And you're just like, you're just thinking, okay, now, so we're probably never going to come to a same conclusion, but I think it's really critical, and some of what's gone on in this country is we don't engage with people who have different experiences. I know so many friends in New York who are like scared to go to Texas. It's like, it's a shame. Texas is a beautiful state. It's really criminal that we have become so fearful of each other that that's even a thought that passes through somebody who considers themselves worldly, that is what goes through their minds. So anyway, to me, it's about I'm constantly, Arlie Hochschild says this about how there's this like tripwire, and you've got to kind of dismantle the tripwire. You don't want to explode things, right? So to me, that, dismantling that tripwire is curiosity. Just keep saying, how can I get curious about this?
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Related to that, I wonder if you can talk about how you identify your characters, so the individuals you're interviewing.
We've done a lot of pre-production before going into the field, and so I had a great person on my staff who's like an uber producer. She's one of those people who just doesn't take no, and I love her for that, because I dread making cold calls. That's one of those things, no matter how much I have to do it, I just hate it. I hate having to sort of pry a door open. And especially when you're working independently, where you're not there representing the New York Times, that you're there representing yourselves, and so you're building trust. We identify people on, it's a lot of research, a lot of thinking about what communities come on our radar. I subscribe to local newspapers all over the country. I'm drowning. My inbox is like exploding with local newspaper, and I try to keep on top. I read headlines. I'm constantly listening for, to me, it's also like a connect the dot painting. Like if we can be successful, there's some drawing happening because we are so interconnected. So I'm always my ears are peeled for what's provocative that's going on somewhere. And then once we choose a place, like an Eagle Pass, I wanted to get down to the border because I just really needed to physically stand there and meet people. And so then we started by picking Eagle Pass because we had been in Austin and it felt like the closest direct route. And I'd never heard of Eagle Pass at the time. I kind of thought, well, what's going on in Eagle Pass? We hear of Brownsville all the time. You hear about Del Rio all the time, El Paso. And so we went down there really because it was a logistical point on the map, and then started to read local newspapers and started to call around. And once you meet one person, you ask them who else they know, and who else they know, and who else they know. And each time we go back, then it opens the door to some new character.
Thank you both so much for your talks, and thanks everyone for coming. We'll see you tomorrow at 8:45. If you have any other questions, they'll be around all week. You can find them.